Hey there, welcome to the Family History Foundation. Welcome to my channel and welcome to familyhistoryfoundation.com. And that's where you can find us today. Let's look at something kind of interesting along the lines of genealogy. And these are to add to the articles and things that I write about genealogy. And I advise on tips and from my own experience how I've researched genealogy over the years and compiled databases. And when I say research, research is a very, very serious sort of word. It's not something that's nonsensical or that should be done halfway. If you know about research standards, you know that they are sort of very, very sort of almost absolute in ways and techniques. So we want to make sure that we always stick to the best possible ways. So if you listen to kind of what I'm talking about here, you can achieve the highest outcomes when it comes to your research, genealogy, and research in general, but this is more about genealogy, obviously. So, and in lining you up with that, these are my top 5 genealogy research mistakes to avoid, okay? And these are kind of like your counterexamples. Do not do this. And you may think, well, why would you tell me not to do something? Well, when you follow through and look at and go through all these things that I'm talking about, you might think, oh yeah, okay, that might have been something I've done, or maybe do, or know somebody did. So I call these Greenhorn Goofs, and these are kind of like, take them with a grain of salt, take them lightheartedly in a way, because I'm trying to set you up for success is really what I'm trying to do. So sort of pin your mind down and focus on how to research properly. And I will give you links to that. I'm not just going to make it all about Greenhorn Goofs. I'm going to actually give you outcomes for each of these things so you can turn these around if you're fall into this category. And as we go through these, if you don't fall into any of the categories, hey, that's awesome. Good for you. Then you know you're standing a little bit taller. Okay. So these are, again, common Greenhorn Goofs. And I've given you these because I've actually probably done all of them. But they're things that I see popping up all the time here, especially on Ancestry, people adding in family trees, doing research. So this is stuff that's out there. It's kind of scary sometimes in how much it permeates actual genealogy research. So these are things that less-than-careless novice genealogists often make. And I'm not talking about super basic things like a wrong name or a wrong date, although it could be. And it encompasses some logical fallacies often. Okay, so now that I've said all that, and hopefully maybe you've gotten, a little bit like, okay, man, am I doing this correctly? So to sort of counter that and make sure that you are on the right track, I've, of course, crafted this blog post here on the ultimate beginner's guide to professional genealogy online. So in order to sort of, round this all out, and this is what the link looks like here, and this is to make sure that you do it correctly. And it's a super comprehensive, I'll leave the link below, in how to research online. And I'll show you the table of contents here. So it's super, it covers everything that you're going to need to know. Okay. So in coalition with that, let's begin. Number 1 on our 5 mistakes list is marriage age research mistakes. So sometimes information is actually left off the table when it was actually correctly right in front of you because of certain assumptions that we've had. And everybody's done this, okay? And in an ideal world, a boy meets a girl, they get married sometime in their early 20s, the parents are happy, they head off to the sunset, start their new life, blah, 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 okay? And sometimes when we find age gaps between potential ancestors, we may say, oh, that can't be them, right? We're looking at one database and another database, and you say, oh, that might not be my ancestor, and we kind of move on, okay? But not only have people got to marry younger than 20, but they've also gotten married older than 30, having larger age gaps in 10 years between the bride and groom. So don't sort of leave something off as a potential ancestor if you actually have something juicy that you might need to just uncover a little bit more. And going back to medieval times, and you can research as far back as you want, but this actually applies today, still as it did back then. Marriages could take place as young as 13 for a bride, although not today, obviously. But the point is, right, and it was not uncommon for grooms to be in their early 30s for getting married, okay? So this is important today because the standard still exists for sometimes people to get married because they had to be able to financially uphold the obligations of getting married. So sometimes that explains gaps in age, especially as you look farther and farther in the past, where consent for marriage was often withheld until someone could have the means to support the family. Okay, so sometimes you may want to consider that. So your outcome for this, number one, is never discount a potential spouse when you're researching, because he or she may be beyond your allowable mental threshold when building your family tree. Okay, so sort of don't just think, broaden your sort of reasoning when you're thinking about this, and never discount the possibility of an ancestor having remarried, of course. Okay, and as I like to say, never add anything without factual documentation. Okay, and that's the worst of all your genealogy mistakes here. So that's number one, right? Marriage age research mistakes. Number two, mobility research mistakes. And I kind of got trapped into this very early on into the game, and why I bring it forward. And I see people, and I've talked to a lot of people who are like, oh, but they were born here. Why the hell were they all the way over here? And then they ended up over here. But it happens, and people moved a lot, especially in the past. Okay, and I've been guilty on more than one occasion of falling to the trap of romanticizing the past, right? Picturing our ancestors living in stained glass conditions in a neatly kept hamlet somewhere in the English countryside. I've all done that, right? But honestly, it really is nonsense. Okay, they did that, but people moved and they went and turned in search of economic opportunities and things like that. Okay, and I threw up a couple quotes here, just sort of even going back to the 1500s, that more than 80% of a population in Buckinghamshire, England, had moved at least once in their life, and that was back in the 1500s. And a quote from population statistics in Virginia, just to say that people actually moved a lot. Okay, so and people picked up, moved on, started farms, sons moved out, daughters remarried, right? So it's like everybody was mobile. Okay. And I have numerous examples, and one of my favorites is one of my ancestors that who moved around. He moved at least 5 times over a period of 7 years in different states, and it was pretty rapid. And I had really had to come to grips with, like, okay, this person's on this census, then he's on this census, and then he's on this sort of list of land taxes, and I'm like, is this the same person? But I really had to decipher out over time. Like, yes, this was the same family. They just moved a lot. So if you're facing some of these situations, you may say, okay, well, let's stop and sort of reason this out. Okay, and if you're unsure of how to correlate those two, again, go back to my ultimate beginner's guide for genealogical research online, and I hopefully will answer all the questions there. So outcome for number 2 is the methodology is to search locally and then broaden your search logically. Okay, search locally and then broaden your search logically. All right, so start in a locale, and if you can't find anybody else there, search out logically, east to west. Maybe increase the radius of your circle, your periphery that you're looking within, and find new people, and it'll always sort of occur. People are there. Okay, and so that's number 2. Okay, number 3, identity theft. And this is where there's been a lot of sort of kerfuffle on the internet, if you want to say it like that. And one of the penultimate genealogical goofs, and I hope whoever's listening right now is listening to me very intently, because this is the majorest thing of all. Okay, adding an incorrect person into your family tree, or as I call it, identity theft. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. These common rookie genealogical mistakes will be disastrous to everything you do down the line after you add that erroneous person into your tree because of lazy research standards. Okay, now think about this. Okay, think about this very carefully. Cases of identity theft, adding an incorrect person into your family tree without vetting that ancestor, that becomes systemic, okay? Because everything down the line after you add that person is wrong, okay? So the outcome for this, Okay, it's just to be careful. And I've given you a middle ground option, actually. So you're not sort of stuck with, do I add this person or just discard them? Okay, and you shouldn't just discard people. Okay, so the outcome, if you are unsure if a person you're researching is quote unquote your family, then don't simply add them into your tree prematurely, right? You're researching back in the 1800s. You can't just walk up to that person and say, hey, are we related? And figure out how you're related or you're not, okay? But here's the huge deal, okay? Don't succumb to the temptation, okay? Don't just add people in without doing your research, okay? But here's the way around it. And this is what I did on my own. And I just taught myself to do this so I could not lose step here. What I do is create a file folder for that person that is labeled as a potential lead and not a fact. So I'm not sure. I create a folder for people that are potential ancestors before I add them in. I never add them in into my ancestry tree until I know they are factually corroborated by at least a few sources. Okay, and this link here goes to an article I wrote on what I call research redundancy and how to organize ancestors and keep track of the ones that aren't yours and how important that is, actually. So there's a whole sort of set of tips to help you with that, okay? And that's number 3. Number 4, the weird kid, okay? And I've seen this a lot in research and have come across this in my own. And that really, the weird kid effect is really like when you're researching families, and if you go back in time like mine, they had 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 children. And so trying to find whose ancestors and who was there and how they were related to one another in terms of their ages can be kind of daunting, right? So sometimes, again, it's illogical to assume that all siblings are the same and that they all have the same personalities, goals, lifestyles, etc. Okay? As siblings today are very different from one another, siblings back in time are also different from one another. But when we're just looking at dates and names and very static sets of informational facts, like it's easy for us to just conflate all those down and lose the emotion or understand who the personalities were behind the names, right? And that's the difference between genealogy and family history, okay? So that's why we're the Family History Foundation. We want to know the stories. Genealogy is dates and names, primarily organization. Family history is about stories, who they were, where they came from, where they moved, and it's a lot about, it's a broader, more sort of emotional spectrum to things. So, and for us, really, us genealogists, it's very difficult not to treat our ancestors with the utmost respect. And we often impose our own historical biases on our research. Yeah. But hey, we are here to venerate our family, aren't we? Yes, we are. Okay. So the weird kid effect reminds us that in every family, there's always the weird kid. Okay. There's always somebody who is aberrant, not quite the normal, whatever that means in whatever time period you're researching. So, just allow for the fact that if you see somebody who had a way different job or moved out and nobody else moved, or did something that you're not sort of comfortable with or did not sort of fit your expectations, don't discount that person. Okay, allow for the weird kid. Okay, and so then that's your outcome. Allow for differences in siblings to emerge while researching. Okay, always let the data inform your genealogical decisions, free of your personal bias. And I've over the years come to just sort of say, hey, you should actually expect and anticipate, and of course embrace the weird kids in your family. Okay. Oh, that's going to make you feel so much better when you're researching, to be honest. Number 5, okay. Misinformation research mistakes. This is a biggie, and I call it the genealogical faux pas, of all time, because, not of all time, but it's huge because it's so pervasive in research today that it simply needs to be reiterated. And that's the danger of misinformation research mistakes, because it's so, like, you think nothing's there, but something's there, right? And that's where, like, a lot of research could be missed, because you're like, oh, that's nothing, I don't need to look at that. But you got to stop and look. Something might be there, okay? So follow me on this. It's how we treat informants, dates, and names. Okay? Not just glossing over information. And this has nothing to do with the identity theft before, but rather ignoring a document or record because the information it contained was taken at face value when in fact it was a misinformation, right? There was something mistranscribed, or there was something that was not written correctly or in the wrong place, and you decided not to look at it or dig a little bit further, okay? And believe me, this has been a source of huge frustrations for me. Many hours of research lost just on this. But I have so many amazing success stories where I followed up on dates and names and where I thought my gut was telling me, no, you got to track this down. And many times, of course, records. I mean, you get into genealogy, you have to know records are discarded because we often recognize that documents themselves are not infallible. We look at a document from the 1800s or 1700s and we think, well, those are documents. They contain the absolute truth. But no, they don't. We have to question them so many different ways, okay? Now, this takes practice and it's a skill set, okay? Because often, informants are often wrong. Dates transposed, names misspelled. I can't tell you how many times I've seen this. 1872 might have been mistranscribed as 1827. And you may think that, hey, that's a 45-year gap, right? You know, you're looking for somebody in 1872, but they wrote 1827. You're like, oh, this can't be true. But maybe that was just mistranscribed. And I've seen this so many times, especially on death certificates and places where other relatives or other informants are writing in information for somebody else. And where they may not know what was going on exactly. So, yeah, be very, very careful. And when you're starting on this, for novice researchers, this is huge, okay? Over time, I've developed my spidey senses to the point where when I'm coming across a document, I kind of know already. I'm like, wait, this is not good. And I can catch it coming on, and detect it. But for, novice researchers, man, you could lose a lot of things. And I did when I first started. And this is the brilliant part about keeping those old records or things you might think of as a potential record. Because, I've gone back a year later and said, hey, I remember that document from so-and-so. It's like, wait, was that the actual one? Then you go back and you're like, oh my gosh, that was the one that I discarded and I thought it was wrong, but it's actually the right person. So again, this huge web of awesomeness that is genealogy, okay? And yeah, you can put these into file folders and it's a place for them to hang out until you can get back to them. That's all it is, okay? And so these are my 5 for you guys to avoid these greenhorn genealogy goofs. Again, 5 misinformation research mistakes. Number 4, the weird kid effect, okay? And number 3, identity theft. Stay away from this one at all costs. And number 2, mobility research mistakes. And number 1 is the marriage age research mistakes. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. We are the Family History Foundation. Thank you for tuning in. Leave a comment below, subscribe, and above all,